How you start your day sets the tone, your mindset, and the direction for the rest of the day. To me, the miracle morning enables me to be the dad that my kids deserve, the husband that my wife deserves, and the leader that my team deserves. These 6 practices that are known by the acronym S.A.V.E.R.S, S-A-V-E-R-S.
All 6 of them have a great quantitative benefit. Of the 6, which do you think was most transformational? If I don't do this, the other 5 seem meaningless.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I was so sick, I was so close to death that I was ready to give up. I read these affirmations every single day, and they made giving up not an option.
Welcome to the Impact Driven Leader Podcast with me, your host, Tyler Dickerhoof. Today, I'm joined by Hal Elrod. Hal, quite honestly, he doesn't really need an introduction, but for those of you that don't know who Hal is, he is the author and really the founder of the movement, The Miracle Morning, which is affecting over 1 million people. I say over 1 million people. What he said is over hundreds of thousands. I think it's well over 1 million people now. He's also someone dedicated to helping others master their morning and optimize their life. We have many mutual friends, a very dear mutual friend. We'll get into that in a bit. But Hal, thank you so much for joining me.
Tyler, it's an honor, man. The conversation leading up to today gave me a lot of faith and excitement in what we're going to cover and where we're going to go.
Yeah. So obviously, The Miracle Morning, it's your seminal work. It's impacted, like I said, millions. I believe that number. You maybe need to update your bio because that number is true in my mind. But where does this whole premise, this idea of either intentionally manufacturing the morning routine, where's that come from?
Yeah, it was very organic. I was not a quote unquote morning person like many people for most of my life. And it was 2008 when the US economy crashed, and I crashed with it. I was a coach.
Me too.
I had
hands up. Me
you
too.
too. Yeah, hands up.
Yep.
I always, whenever I speak, I'm a keynote speaker. I always rate, hey, anybody else around and struggle in 2008? It's like, half the hands always go up. I go, all right, it wasn't alone. But 6 months of this downward spiral where I lost over half of my clients, lost over half my income, couldn't pay the mortgage, turned my house back over to the bank, canceled the gym membership. My body fat percentage tripled during those 6 months. So I was really in the worst shape of my life, physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, in most areas of my life. And a Jim Rohn quote was the catalyst that changed everything. And a buddy sent me this audio. My friend knew I was really struggling, and I asked him for help. And he said, listen to this Jim Rohn audio. And Jim Rohn said, your level of success will seldom exceed your level of personal development. And I think I had heard the quote before, but it never really landed. It was like, yeah, okay, got it, whatever. So grow up, personal development. Okay. When I heard it, I quantified it that day where I went, okay, on a level, if my level of success won't exceed my level of personal development, what level of success do I want on a scale of 1 to 10? Well, of course, level 10. Every human wants to be as happy and healthy and wealthy and successful as we can be. But then I went, well, if my level of success is not going to exceed my level of personal development, that begs the question, what is my current life? I need to assess and be honest, what's my level of personal development? And I would define that as like, what are the daily rituals and routines that are enabling you to become the person you need to be to create the success you want? And my answer was like a 2 or 3. So I want level 10 success. And Tyler, I believe this is true for like 95% of our society
Entirely.
We all want level 10 success, but very few of us have a daily personal development routine that enables us to show up at a level 10 version of ourselves every single day and become that person we need to be. And so my epiphany was, what if I go study what the world's most successful people do for personal development? I assemble the best practices into a daily personal development routine, and I start every day with that. So I'm in a peak mental, physical, emotional, and spiritual state to take the day on. And it was hypothetical, and I was starting from a place of scarcity, like struggle. I'm not in a good place. But I woke up the next morning, and the day before I had researched, I came up with 6 practices: meditation, affirmations, visualization, exercise, reading, and journaling. Any one of those is a game-changing practice. Combining all 6 to me, I thought would be the ultimate routine. And within 2 months of doing what I started calling my miracle morning, I doubled my income at the height of the 2008 Great Recession, and the economy got worse, but I got better. And that's why the result was what it was. And I started training for an ultra marathon, which I ended up completing. And I wasn't a runner. This was like this Miracle Morning was inspiring me to go, what's level 10 in every area of my life? And I went from being depressed to being the best version of myself, if you will. And I realized that, okay, this changed my life. I have to share it with others. And it started with my coaching clients. And then it went to, it worked for them. It worked for me. Most of us weren't morning people. I have a responsibility to share this with the world. And I started writing the Miracle Morning, and I self-published it in 2012, unknown author. But I was like, I'm going to change 1 million lives one morning at a time. That was my mission. And I tried to do it in 1 year, and I failed I was 987,000 copies short of my goal, year one. And it took 6 years, and the rest is kind of history, as they say.
So as your research now in the years since, right? We're 16 years since that 2008, which is hard to believe it's been that long. But if we look back into your research and understanding, are there other cultures in time that have embraced this morning routine where you look back and say, oh, the great Romans, the Egyptians, the Israeli, are there other cultures that have maybe aspired to some of these practices that it's coming back to those, or is it de novo?
I don't have, I would be lying if I said that I had that specific research at the tip of my tongue. But, you can look at, in our culture at least, Benjamin Franklin, outright,
there you go.
There's so many of these people throughout history that were known for their morning routine. And like Benjamin Franklin, he practiced polyphasic sleep, which was where he would sleep 4 hours a night on average. And then he would every few hours, he would take like a 15-minute, called a cat nap. And I tried that, by the way. It did not work for me. I don't think I committed long enough, right? But it's this idea that, like, I'm a big believer in common sense approaches to life and success, right? I'm not the scientist that's like, I can show you the double-blind placebo study that says. I just relate it where you go, okay, think about it this way. How you start your day sets the tone, your mindset, and the direction for the rest of the day. If you have a focused, productive, growth-oriented, goal-oriented morning, then you are putting yourself in a position to create that type of day. If you start your day by, hitting the snooze button 3 times, which is procrastinating on the literal act of starting your day, and then you grab your smartphone, you start scrolling, which puts it spikes your cortisol levels. Now you're starting your day reacting to the notifications and the text messages and the emails, which a lot of leaders, a lot of CEOs do that, right?
Yeah.
You've now started your day not in a peak state, not in a productive state, but in a reactive state. And far too many of us, especially as leaders, that's how we live our lives. We're reacting to our emails, we're reacting to the demands of other people, we're reacting to our environment versus starting our day with no interruption, with no notifications, with a calm, peaceful, positive, proactive, growth-oriented morning that fosters optimal mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being and enables us to be not just better leaders at work, but better leaders in our home. To me, the Miracle Morning enables me to be the dad that my kids deserve, the husband that my wife deserves, and the leader that my team deserves.
I know you get this comment, maybe not as many people that, come to you as far as they've read the Miracle Morning, but in your coaching clients, I get it in mine is like, I don't have time. And my comment and my belief on that is you don't have time not to. One of the things that I embraced several years ago, and John Maxwell was huge in this and kind of setting my desires. I want to be better today than I was yesterday with the intention and working towards being better tomorrow than I was today. And part of that's my morning routine, much like yours, right? And for leaders that say, I don't have time, I live on the West Coast and, I wake up at 5 o'clock and I'm already getting emails from the East Coast looking for answers right now. How do you break that down and say, just give it 30 days and I know you will be better? Like, walk myself and the audience through how you prescribe and say, all right, I get it, but this will change your life.
Yeah, the first answer is that it's completely customizable and adaptable to your current rituals or routines or lifestyle. Like, for example, I'm a big fan of Robin Sharma, who wrote the 5
Yeah.
a.m. Club. And when I was researching the Miracle Morning, he hadn't written that book yet, but the 5 a.m. Club was like a thing that he did YouTube videos on, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of people hear that and they go, I don't have either I don't have time or I don't want to get up at 5 a.m. And I always say the Miracle Morning is not the 5 a.m. Club. It's if you wake up at 7 a.m. and start your day, then now you're going to wake up, 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes, an hour if you're ambitious earlier to implement the Miracle Morning. And it's these 6 practices that are known by the acronym S.A.V.E.R.S, S-A-V-E-R-S. But customizable in terms of you can do a 60-minute Miracle Morning or you can do a 6-minute Miracle Morning. In fact, there's a chapter in the new edition of the book called the 6-minute Miracle Morning. And it's not hyperbole. It's literally, it happened because we often have an all or nothing mentality where if we have an intended idea of what something is supposed to be like, and we can't do it in the amount of time we want, like if you like going to the gym for half an hour and you don't have the 30 minutes, you're like, I'm just going to skip today. And I kept doing that with my Miracle Morning back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, was I'd be like, I was doing a 1 hour Miracle Morning. And I go, I've only got 20 minutes. Like I won't do it. And then I kept catching myself and I go, wait a minute, like this all or nothing mentality is not serving me. And one day I had like 10 minutes before I had to leave and I was all ready to walk out the door and I go, okay, I'm going to do a 6-minute Miracle Morning. And the reason I chose 6 minutes is because there's 6 practices. I've only got 10 minutes. I'll set my timer for 60 seconds and I'll do the S in S.A.V.E.R.S is silence, prayer, meditation, breath work, or simply sitting in stillness. I set the timer for 60 seconds and I closed my eyes. I took a few deep breaths. I said a quick prayer, and 60 seconds, the timer went off, and I had calmed my nervous system. I got centered for the day, and I felt a little bit of gratitude, right? And then I set the timer, and I went into my affirmations, and I pulled the affirmations. They're in a Word doc or a printed document. I pull them up, and I can't get through the whole page, but I get through the first couple, and they affirm what I'm committed to in the most important areas of my life. Why those results are absolute musts for me. Who am I doing it for? For me, for my family, and which actions am I going to take? And in 60 seconds, I got through the first 1 or 2 of the most important. And then I went into visualization and I closed my eyes and I mentally rehearsed myself doing the things today that I needed to do to achieve the goals that I was committed to. And then I stood up for exercise, the E in S.A.V.E.R.S, and I did 60 seconds of jumping jacks. Now, I'm not building a bunch of muscle, but boy, am I awake. The blood is flowing. The oxygen's flowing to my brain. I'm feeling alert. I'm feeling I have more clarity. Then I did the R in S.A.V.E.R.S, which is reading. I pulled a book off my shelf and I read a page and I got one idea that I went, wow, I'm going to do that. I'm going to implement that today. That's transformative. And then the last S in S.A.V.E.R.S is scribing. I pulled out my journal and I wrote down a few things I was grateful for, and the timer went off 60. And I went, wait a minute. That was only 6 minutes of my life. And I feel calmer. I feel clear. I learned something I could apply. I rehearsed the thing I'm going to do today to achieve my goals, right? I'm grateful. And in 1/10 of the time that I was used to, I got arguably 80% of the benefit. And so that's an example of no one doesn't have 6 minutes. And I don't recommend that 6 minutes is where you land and you never go beyond that. You can only go so deep. But it's like once you've done a 30-minute Miracle Morning a few times or a 60-minute, now you get the gist of how to spend time in silence, what the affirmations are like, right? And then you can completely narrow it down and make the duration whatever you want it to be.
All 6 of them, I think, part of your framework is all 6 of them have a great quantitative benefit.
Yeah.
But of the 6, which do you think was most transformational? Or do you find, man, all of them are beneficial, like all of them, but man, this one is just, if I don't do this, the other 5 seem meaningless.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I normally have an immediate answer to that question, and I will have the answer. But today I was recording a podcast on on customizing your miracle morning to achieve your goals next year. So it's like, look, you could have a generic miracle morning where you're every day, you're doing a little bit of this, a little bit, you're doing all your savers, you're feeling better. But I talked about how do you actually cater all 6 practices to achieving your goals for the year? Like it's not just to feel better. It's like, I am outcome oriented.
Yeah.
Because when I launched the miracle morning, my goal was to double my income. And I did it in 2 months. That's why I called it the miracle morning, because I doubled my income in 2 months, and I was trying to do it in 12. And the point is, though, normally my answer to the question is affirmations. Affirmations, I believe, are the most misunderstood and the most mistaught, and yet the most effective form of personal development if you do them effectively. And we can break that down. But what I said this morning as I was going through the S.A.V.E.R.S on the podcast that I was recording that'll come out in a couple of weeks, I said, you know what? I got to reading. I'm going through them sequentially. And I go, you know what? I've actually got to tell you that when it comes to achieving your goals, reading is as important as affirmations. And here's why. In 2008, I needed to book more clients. That's how I made my money. I was a coach. And so I Googled, what's the best book on how to get clients? And the book, Book Yourself Solid by Michael Port, is what I found. And I ordered that book. Now, during the R in S.A.V.E.R.S, I read that book each morning, and I started taking the most important strategies and tactics, and then I put them into my affirmations that I wrote in Microsoft Word. But the point is, if I didn't have the guidance from somebody that went before me, right, Michael Port, and he was like, dude, this is what you do to get more clients, I would have not doubled my income. I would have just been like more focused and positive and learning and growing and whatever. Right. So that was crucial, though, for the very specific guidance. So the answer to your question generally is affirmations, because it allows me to articulate what I'm committed to in my life. Step 1. So number 1, affirm what you're committed to. Number 2, affirm why it's a must for you. And number 3, affirm which actions you will take and when. And by reading an affirmation formula that doesn't just say like, I'm a money magnet and I'm amazing and I'm wealthy, but it's actually rooted in truth. It's based on what you're committed to accomplishing in your life. It's affirming and reminding you of why it's so important to you that you're willing to do whatever it takes, whether you feel like it or not. And then you're clarifying in your affirmations the actions you're going to take and when you're going to take them. That programs your subconscious mind and your behaviors toward whatever ends you're committed to. So they're a tie. You've got to read the books. If you don't know what you need to do and you're not an expert in the thing you're trying to accomplish, then the book's crucial. But once you're clear on what you need to do, which can be informed by the book you're reading, that affirmations formula I've found to be by far the anchor of my entire miracle morning.
So here's my take on that. I come from a nutrition background. I was nutritionist for cows. And one of the things that in nutrition, and this is any human, mammal, whatever, is the limiting nutrient. And so if we look at amino acids, like whatever's the limiting amino acid. So if we look at these 6 S.A.V.E.R.S, I almost speculate what you just said there is it really comes down to is which is the most limiting. Is it the fact that I am so worried and anxious that I'm not taking time to be silent? So my affirmations are just kind of like what you said earlier. I'm just going through the motions. They really don't matter because I'm not taking time to actually believe them. Or is it, man, I'm so unhealthy. I'm not exercising. That's the limiting one. And so I love what you shared there, the affirmations, the reading, because if you're not informing your affirmations with your reading, it doesn't matter. But I even wonder if we sit here and go beyond that. It's like, well, that I believe both of those, but it's almost kind of if one of those others in your life is the most limiting for where you want to go, that might be the one that you need to really make sure is dialed in because it will allow the other 5 to occur. What do you think? Like, give me your thoughts there.
I think that makes a lot of sense, right? So like if you're experiencing a lot of stress and anxiety, now, well, let me answer it differently.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So here's the way that I would look at it. I was about to say, if you're experiencing stress and anxiety, meditation might be the practice that you need the most. But as I was about to say that to you, I go, yeah, but I would also be reading a book on how to overcome stress and anxiety, right? Like, and then I would have affirmations that were informing that, why I was committed to that, why I was doing it for my spouse because it would improve our marriage, my kids because it would improve their life and their future and make sure they didn't develop anxiety as a result of their parent, right? Like that. The affirmations piece for me when I had cancer, so I was diagnosed with a rare aggressive form of cancer and given a 20% chance of surviving at 37 years old, 7 years ago. And being told you have a 20% chance of surviving, which is an 80% chance of dying. And at the time that I was diagnosed, my heart, my lungs, and my kidneys were already failing, and I was given 1 to 3 weeks to live if I didn't start chemotherapy. And so all of a sudden, the only goal that I had in my life was beat cancer and stay alive for my family. So I'm going to recite the affirmations that I believe played a major role, a consequential role in saving my life. Because there were very many days where I was so sick, I was so close to death that I was ready to give up. But I read these affirmations every single day, and they made giving up not an option. And so step one, and as I'm sharing my affirmations, I'm going to remind people of this formula. Step one, affirm what you're committed to. I am committed to beating cancer and living to be 100 plus years old alongside Ursula and the kids. No matter what, there is no other option. When you affirm what you're committed to with such conviction, day after day after day after day after day, you actually become committed, right? In your mind, body, and soul. And whether or not you achieve anything in your life, of course, it's if you're committed, you will. And if you're not fully committed, you'll find a way out, right? So I affirm that I was committed. The second step, affirm why it's a must for you. I had 5 reasons. Number 1, I'm committed to beating cancer for Ursula because I promised her forever and a day. Number 2, I'm committed to beating cancer for Halston and Sophia, my 2 kids who were 7 and 4 at the time, because I want to watch my babies grow up and they need their daddy's love and guidance. Number 3, I'm committed to beating cancer for my mom and dad because they already lost a child and they do not deserve to lose another one. Number 4, I'm committed to beating cancer for myself because I deserve to live a long, happy, healthy life as much as any other person on this planet. And number 5, I'm committed to beating cancer for the millions of people who are themselves battling cancer or some other disease and may not have the knowledge or resources that I do. And it's my responsibility to overcome my challenge so I can help them overcome theirs. Those 5 reasons, that was step 2 of the affirmation, why it was a must for me. Tyler, those were so compelling, so important, so meaningful that when I felt like giving up, I'd read those and go, oh yeah, there's no other option. Like I'm doing it for my wife, my kids, my parents, myself, like there's no other option. And then the third step was I just affirmed, like I had a whole long list of here's all the holistic protocols that I'm going to do to ensure that I survive this. So that formula kept me alive.
As you mentioned there, that last piece, as far as understanding the holistic, this has been something that I have come to know and appreciate and understand. I think about my conversation with Dr. Caroline Leaf and talking about our thoughts drive our body's responses to everything. When we go back to that leader that's like, I don't have time, how much is that manifesting? I can't do what you did as far as like overcoming cancer because we already decided before we ever got there in the day.
Yeah, I think it's the foundation of everything, right? And mindset being the foundation of everything. And so before cancer, I almost died in a car accident. When I was 20, I was hit head on by a drunk driver at 70 miles per hour, and I was found dead at the scene. My heart stopped for 6 minutes, and then I spent 6 days in a coma, and I flatlined twice more. And when I came out of the coma, 6 days after being hit by the drunk driver, I was told I had 11 broken bones. I had broken my femur in half. I had broken my pelvis in 3 places. I had broken my arm in 2 pieces. I had broken my eye socket. And the doctor said I would never walk again, and I had permanent brain damage. And that was really where, I call it divine intervention, but I told my parents that, look, I know the doctors are saying they don't think I'm going to walk again. And if I never walk again, I've already decided I'll be at peace with that. I'll be the happiest person you've ever seen in a wheelchair. That was my worst case scenario. Okay, I'm in a wheelchair, but I'm smiling in that wheelchair. Okay, I can handle that. Now that I've accepted the worst case scenario, I'm not afraid of it anymore. I live with zero fear. Now I'm going to focus 100% of my energy on what it is that I want. I'm going to visualize walking again. I'm going to pray about walking again. I'm going to put all of my energy into that possibility. And one of the most important beliefs that I had learned a year and a half prior when I had started my Cutco sales career was, if another human being has done something, they've overcome something, they've accomplished something, that's evidence of what's possible for all of us. And I don't think we do that normally. Normally, we create separation between us and people that we view as better than us, right? Like, oh,
Yeah.
wow, if only I had what they had. They're more positive than I am, or they're older or younger or more accomplished or have more resources or have better connect, whatever. We find all sorts of excuses to separate why they can do it and we can't. And when I was in my sales career and I wanted to break the all-time Cutco record, I was like, well, wait a minute. If another human being sold X amount of Cutco in 10 days, why don't I sell X amount plus $1? Like, right? Like, it's possible. And so when I did that in Cutco, I took that belief into the car accident. I was like, if another human being has defied the odds and proven doctors wrong, I'll be the next guy that does that, right? And so to your point, that belief that if another human being has done something, and you can apply this to every walk of life, saved a marriage, beaten cancer, walked again, become a millionaire, you name it, that's evidence of what's possible for you, for me, and for every single one of us.
I sense it. I feel it. That belief right there is, I think, what drives you to do what you do. The idea that if somebody else did it, I could do it. And if I am that example to someone else, they can do it too.
I'll tell you that I love that you said that. I think that's the belief that used to drive me, and now it's just in my toolkit, if you will.
Yeah.
The belief that drives me now is I've been blessed with one life, and I have a responsibility to serve as many people to the highest ability that I possibly have. That's the belief that has driven me since my probably started in my car accident. The seed was planted. I still had a little ego then that needed to mature and I needed to kind of evolve. But now, like when I came out of my car accident, I told my dad, I said, Dad, ever since I've started selling Cutco and I'm speaking at all these events, like I love speaking. And I know there are some people that they do that for a living. Maybe that's why this car accident happened to me. And I'm literally at 20 at the time, broken arm, broken leg, still don't know if I'm going to walk again. I can literally picture the conversation with my dad. And, which we were having, by the way, because the doctors told him they thought I was in denial because I was so happy and positive. They called my parents and they're like, we think Hal is being delusional or he's in denial because he's so happy and positive. And so my dad came in and like addressed this concern. And I said, no, Dad, I'm at peace. I can't change that I was in a car accident. What's the point of being sad and angry and depressed? Like, this is my life. I'm accepting it as it is. I'm going to make the best of it. And that's when I said, and maybe that's why this happened, because I had a pretty, I always want to be a professional speaker, Dad, but I've had like a normal life. Like, yeah, I got bullied and stuff, but like you and Mom were good parents. I've never overcome or accomplished anything extraordinary. Maybe that's why this happened, because I'm supposed to go through this difficult experience in the most positive, proactive way that I can, so that I can then overcome it and go teach other people how to do the same. So that belief started driving me at that point, was like, how can I take my experience and serve others? And that stems from my mom, by the way. When my sister died, I was 8 years old, and I woke up to my mom screaming across the hall, and my 18-month-old baby sister was dead in her arms. And I called 911. Within 6 months of a parent's greatest tragedy, my mom and dad founded a support group to lead other parents through grieving who had lost children. And they started raising money for the hospital that cared for my sister. So at a young age, the seed, and I didn't catch it until after my car accident, but it was planted that when you go through a tragedy, when you're in pain, you turn your pain into purpose by finding a way to help other people. So yeah, I love that you asked that. I think we can have more than one belief that drives us, that serves us, right? And definitely that belief that anything another can do, we can do too. But also this belief that I believe we have a responsibility to live our life in service of others.
Here's where I can relate to that. I was 14 when my younger brother, who was 3, died. And why I can relate to that is what you observed as an 8-year-old and what your parents did proactively. I saw my parents not necessarily. And here's the difference is as you look back as a 20-year-old and those experiences stacked is what propelled you forward. For myself, it wasn't until I was a 37-year-old and I was realizing this is how I dealt with things that was not healthy. And I feel like as a person of faith, God revealed to me, this is how you need to fix it. But at the same point, why do I feel committed to what we talked about earlier? What this podcast is to overcome insecurities with vulnerability and being empathetic, is because that is what crippled me. Not because I dealt with that death in a manifestation of guilt. No, none. Because I drove over him. It was more of, oh, this is how I respond to the trauma, the difficulty. And it wasn't through all of the affirmations of, oh, this is possible. It was, I'm just getting through. And as I reflect what you're sharing, and I feel committed to this today, and I'll share it this way, my brother's life had a meaning because I'm talking to you right now today.
Yeah.
And I think that's where, if we strip all of this back, and I come back to what I mentioned earlier, is all of those experiences are what drive you to say, hey, if I did it, so can you.
Yeah.
And there's a conviction in me as I'm saying to you is, if I can do it, so can someone else.
Yeah. I love that frame. And that is, I remember like when I'd start speaking relatively recent after the accident, I would use that as the frame. I would say, look, like if I could choose to be happy when I was being told I would never walk again, then how might you look at the challenges that you're facing, and you can choose to be happy in the midst of those challenges, that adversity. And that is a really good point. And that kind of almost combines the two beliefs that we shared, right? Anything another human can do, you can do too. And I have a responsibility to serve other people and share my challenges. And you combine the two, and you have exactly what you just said.
Well, and I think that's what drives to purpose. And I think coming back to the one of the initial comments and questions is, why don't people do it? Is I think there's this belief in our society that we don't have agency to change or accomplish, because that's been ingrained in like we don't dream enough, we don't visualize enough, all those things like, oh, go do the work, quit visualizing. I'm like, no, that's a part of the work. And, going through and allowing our fears and insecurities to pick out the comparative moments and say, hey, how you can't speak, you're not like, whatever else. It's like, no, actually I can, because there's somebody else that can do it. I can do it, right? That's how you framed your mind. And yet often people go to the negative rather than the what's possible. And as I hear from you today, and as I've learned from, all the stuff you've written in the community, it's like, no, we can overcome anything if we choose to.
And, you mentioned when you say the word insecurity, that like really pops for me, because I feel like I, to this day, am the insecure high school student that I was. You know what I mean? Like in high school, I wasn't super popular. And like to this day, it's funny. Now my insecurities around like being popular manifest in my peer group, right? So like fellow authors and influencers, and I'm not as cool as them. I'm not as good as them. I'm not, you know what I mean? Still dealing with those. And I think that for me, my miracle morning, that is a part of it, is like one of my favorite affirmations is, I am just as worthy, deserving, and capable of achieving everything I want in my life as any other person on this planet, and I will prove that today with my actions, right? Because and what that's addressing is the fundamental insecurity that I'm not as worthy, I'm not as deserving, and I'm not as capable, right? It's that imposter syndrome that almost all of us suffer from. So that's been a foundational affirmation since probably 2008, 2009 that I wrote. And I still to this day, like recite that affirmation. I am just as worthy, just as deserving, and it's like anything. It's like, it's an ongoing process. Very rarely do you completely become that level 10. You don't ever become the level 10 version of yourself, right? On your deathbed, you can look back and go, I can still get better.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is my theoretical belief, is that we all have fears and insecurities and we'll never be exempt of them. And we can come to grips with them. For me, it's owning, how do I show up? For me, it was being intense. And that was God taking me back to a lesson of like the day that my brother died, and how did I respond to the questioning from the sheriff is like, it was an accident. I'm going to go milk those cows. We're done. And it was with this level of intensity. And I dipped into that. Like you had the example of your parents, and like they went to positive, what's possible? How can we serve? What can we do? Right? For me, it was just, I'm going to go push myself through a wall. And what's interesting in my opinion is I see that as I look at other people that I'm around, other leaders, and how many leaders manifest their insecurity in ways such as intensity. And I would, sit here and say, Hal, all right, when you're in that community, how do you start to show up? Like, what do you do? Like, what do you do to try to, that high school, middle school, I'm worthy, guys, look at me. I'm okay. Or, and so wonder if you think about it, how do you show up there?
Yeah, for me, it is authenticity. There's one of my quotes that I came up with when I was speaking. So after the car accident, I have brain damage, permanent brain damage, and it affects my short-term memory particularly. And so I've used affirmations to help like reprogram my mind, and they've actually really worked. But I remember I was giving one of my first speeches. I was like 21 years old after the car accident, and I was so insecure that I had two insecurities. One is my memory is terrible, and I don't want to forget what I'm talking about. But my other fear is I don't want to be reading off a piece of paper because that's not what a professional speaker does. So it's this dichotomy, like I can't read off notes the whole time, and I don't want to forget, but I have brain damage and a short-term memory loss. And so I remember I was giving the speech, and I completely forgot, and I was trying not to look at my notes, and I completely forgot what I was talking about. And immediately I'm like fight or flight. And thankfully I thought of this witty thing. I was like, hey y'all, you may or may not know, but I was in a car accident and I have brain damage. I said, so I have short-term memory loss. So this is a collaborative effort. We're on the same team. Can anybody know what I was talking about? And they all kind of laughed. And then they started shouting out, you were talking about your mom. And I go, oh, what about her was I telling? They go, you were telling that story about her, naming you Yo Pal Hal on the radio. And I was like, yes, thank you. And I remember the moment and the way I felt that the entire audience, it was like this collective joy of like, that was fun. We got him back on track. And when that speech was over, I wrote down, give up being perfect for being authentic. Give up the need to be perfect for the opportunity to be authentic. And the more you dive into that, you realize that A, nobody is perfect. B, nobody's attracted to perfect, right? They're attracted to authentic. And Robin Sharma has a great quote that says, when you're vulnerable, people fall in love with you. And to me, the word authentic and the word vulnerable they're synonyms, right? And so when you're authentic, when you're they're close. They're very close.
Well, this is how there's authentic vulnerability.
Okay.
So, for example, you could be telling us about your short-term brain loss and like, hey, feel bad for me.
Oh, yeah.
No, don't feel bad for me. That's just being inauthentically vulnerable where you're just like a victim, authentically vulnerable. Hey, I have short-term brain loss. Help me out here. And to me, the difference in what you showed the example of when you did that, the honest, which I absolutely love. The best way to overcome our insecurities or embrace them because everyone else can see them. They just don't know it's an insecurity. But when you say, hey, sorry, that with that vulnerability, the audience was empathetic with you. They put their arm around you and walked with you and say, hey, we're in this together. It's all good, man.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, that's a great point. The authentic vulnerability and not the victim vulnerability, right?
Yeah,
I would say
there's a big difference.
Yeah, big difference. And so I think that for me, after that, I got very comfortable being vulnerable. And the only negative to it is I literally I talk to everyone like I'm talking to my best friend for the most part. And so I just share things that you would normally, people are like, oh, wow, he's going there. The only negative is my wife gets wrapped into it a lot because I'm like, so anyway, me and my wife, yada, yada, yada. She's like, and she'll be overhearing a podcast. She's like, do not share that with other people. And I'm like, oh, my bad. She's like, yeah, she's not quite as open to being vulnerable as I am. And
I'm married to one similar. And but this is something I've embraced and I share with you. And, it's kind of tongue in cheek is, I have no problem making a fool of myself in service of others.
There you go. Thank you. Well said.
And so part of that is, and it's also, I think that's What we're talking about right now is, I think, what keeps people from doing the miracle morning, doing something like that because I'm going to commit to it because it will help me. And it also is what keeps leaders from leading people. Because if I can't master the S.A.V.E.R.S, well, then I can't be authentic and vulnerable. And therefore, I'm going to show up to someone and they think I'm a failure. Instead of doing what you did on stage, like, hey, all right, I lost where I was at. This is me. And through my experience, the day that I threw up in the air and said, hey, I'm sorry, my insecurity is showing because I'm trying to prove my worth with authenticity and vulnerability, that's when people started to embrace me. That's when, as a leader, I was able to impact and serve people. And I think you shared an exact, whether you realized it or not, that exact example that day on stage, which I think what you found is like, oh, I can do that.
Yeah, it's so important that in the context of being a leader and vulnerability in the context of being a leader, and I would imagine that you know, this is your wheelhouse, but it's the idea that like leaders more than almost anyone try to appear perfect, right? And sometimes,
Absolutely.
and that leaders across the board, meaning parents often, well, I can't show my flaws to my child. And I'll tell
Yes.
you what, the best parenting advice I ever heard was like 5 years ago on Rogan's podcast, Joe Rogan. And I'll paraphrase what he said, of course. He said something along the lines of, when kids mess up, parents often, hey, don't do that. You're not supposed to, right? And the kid feels shame, they feel embarrassed, they feel belittled, whatever. And Rogan said, whenever my kid makes a mistake, whether it's in the moment or it's this, he comes home and got in trouble at school, whatever. He said, I immediately look into my own life to try to find when I did something as close as possible to what he's doing. And I say, hey, buddy, man, look, we're going to talk about this. I know what you're going through. When I was 16, like I actually did the same thing. I stole my parents' car or whatever it is, right? And then now the child goes, oh, you're not perfect? You did something. So I'm not this horrible, shameful human, and you're not completely judging and condemning me for what I did, right? Okay, now they're listening versus being tuned out because they feel like you're attacking them. And then he says, man, but here was the consequence, and here's what I learned from it.
Yep.
And so I don't want you to make the same mistake, right? Maybe the kid's smoking or whatever,
Yeah.
right? And then they have a conversation about it. But I think that as a leader, to show our vulnerability and not be afraid, not think nobody wants us to be perfect. When we show that we're authentic and we're imperfect, and we're willing to admit mistakes and course correct and so on and so forth, I think that's when we become really powerful leaders, and our people really they don't, not because they fear us, but they actually love us, and that's what we want.
There's empathy.
Yeah,
There's like, hey, we're in this together.
totally.
I just, Will Guidara, earlier this week shared, or last week maybe, his pre-meal. Will from Unreasonable Hospitality. And there was a lady that spoke at his conference, Dr. Becky Kennedy, and she shared pretty much the exact same thing. So I wanted to give an authored resource there. But that to me is leadership. If you're not doing that, you're doing it wrong. And it's also where I believe people fear that leadership is lonely, is because we create this insecure little bubble over here and we think through either our intensity, our insensitivity. I don't know what you're dealing with. I don't want to, or I'm just not going to touch that we think, hey, we can be a better leader. But as you just shared through your own experience, is like, no, it is that. This is my belief. And I think this is where it ties into exactly what you have in S.A.V.E.R.S, is recognizing our fears and insecurities. We have them. Owning how it shows up. Like you said, hey, it can show up as like, oh, is this guy real or not? Yeah. But then using what you said from the affirmations and the reading to change those beliefs, much like you did, to say, oh, well, somebody else can do it. I have value. I have a skill set. I can, be that. Man, that to me is this great compilation of what we're all possible and able to do.
Yeah, I agree. And we talked about earlier, the idea that the S.A.V.E.R.S specifically, this miracle morning practice, this acronym S.A.V.E.R.S, that any one of these you can apply to whatever your objective is, right? If you're trying to be a better leader, so on and so forth. And I want to paraphrase something that Robert Kiyosaki said, the author of Rich Dad Poor Dad, Robert, his assistant, reached out to me and invited me on Rich Dad Radio, which was like, I was blown away. And the craziest part is she said, Robert has read your book 3 times and he's been doing the S.A.V.E.R.S every day, the Miracle Morning every day for 3 months. And it's changing his life. He wants you on his podcast. Now, as someone who Robert is one of my favorite authors, he's on a pedestal. And I'm like, is this really happening? But I went on his podcast, and at the end of the episode, he summed this up better than I ever had. He said, Hal, I think you named the book perfectly, The Miracle Morning. And I said, okay, why? He said, because I've been in the personal development space for 30 plus years. He said, every successful person on the planet, every leader, every CEO, they practice at least one and usually 2 or 3 of the S.A.V.E.R.S. Maybe they exercise and they read and they journal, right? Or they do a couple of them. He said, but in my 30 years, I've never met anyone that did all 6 of these. He called them ancient best practices. And he said, I've been doing them for 3 months now, almost every day. And he said, I'm experiencing miracles in my health, in my business, and in my marriage. That's why I think you named the book correctly. Because any one of the S.A.V.E.R.S will change your life. But when you stack all 6 of them, you experience miracles, extraordinary results, whatever you want to call them. And so for anybody listening, right, like whether you feel like you're a morning person or not, if you're pressed for time, do a short miracle morning. Wake up tomorrow and do one of the S.A.V.E.R.S, right? But starting your day in this peak mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual state, harnessing 6 of the most timeless personal development practices, it can't not transform you as a leader and as a human being.
Man, I love it. Where can people find out more about the Miracle Morning? I know you have an app. I know you have a bunch of resources. Where can people find those?
Yeah, miraclemorning.com is the hub, right? And you can access the Miracle Morning movie there. There's a 90-minute documentary that features Robert Kiyosaki and Robin Sharma and Mel Robbins and Lewis Howes and Brendan Burchard and a bunch of leaders in it and how they're using their morning routines. Miracle Morning movie, you can watch that free on YouTube. The Miracle Morning app, you can download free. And of course, the book is the flagship. You can get that on Amazon. And it is a new updated and expanded edition that I just published less than a year ago with 70 pages of new content in addition to what was in the original. So it is a new edition of the book. Even if somebody's read the original, this one is new and improved for sure.
Hal, thank you so much. I enjoyed getting a chance to finally catch up with you. And thank you so much. For those of you that are watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the subscribe button as well as the bell so you get notified whenever new content is dropped as well. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is, if you could do this, if you could rate and review this episode so that way more people can find great, impactful leaders like Hal, I would surely appreciate it. Until next time, choose to lead with impact.